Welcome. Resurrect the Republic, Dirty Uncle Sam, Truth Radio broadcast on RBN. Our guest that we have, special guest today, Judge Anna Vonrietz, whom I highly respect. I respect her position, I respect her research, and I concur with the majority of what I've read. And I do believe that she has a way of illustrating what the problem is and what we can do from here. Welcome to the show, Judge Anna Vonrietz. Welcome.
Well, thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you, ma'am.
What part of the animal are we going to discuss today?
This is an hour-long open forum, and I wanted to introduce the RBN audience to you so that you could share with them basically who you are, what it is that you stand for, and what it is we're trying to accomplish against this administrative corporation that is presenting itself as the rightful republic form of government.
Well, I guess kind of as an introduction, I'd like to point out something that I was discussing earlier this morning with a group of people, and that is that there are 3 Congresses that we're all familiar with, if we stop and think about it. There's the Continental Congress, which prosecuted the entire Civil Revolutionary War, and there's the Congress of the United States. That sounds familiar too, doesn't it? And there's also the Congress of the United States of America. And if you read your Constitution carefully, you will see that both are mentioned. So you have the Continental Congress on the land, continent, land, right? Continental Congress. Yes. And then you have these 2 other bodies, the Congress of the United States and the Congress of the United States of America. So you've got 3 entities there right from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And we have to understand that our government, our republic, is based on the land. The land jurisdiction is the jurisdiction that we, the people, have and hold without any question, without any usurpation possible, without any possible understanding being required. So, that being true, what's happened so that we are now being chased around the countryside by corporate employees pretending to work for us and yet oppressing us? That story goes back to more recent times than the Civil War, actually, although it started during and after the Civil War.
Yes, we understand really it was a process.
Yes, it was a long process, and the real pedal hit the metal in the 1950s and 60s when our state and county governments all incorporated. When you incorporate anything, you take it from the jurisdiction of the land, out from under the law of the land, away from the determinations that were set by the Continental Congress, and you place it in the jurisdiction of the sea, which is international in nature and which functions under the law of the sea. So, in the twinkling of an eye, we had this gigantic changeover, and yet everything appeared to be the same. I mean, nobody stood out on the street corners and blew horns and said, oh, okay, well, we're no longer functioning under the law of the land, we're now under the international law of the sea. And they never bothered to explain the changes and retasking of roles and responsibilities that went with that. And I guess that the most important and also the most misunderstood role is that of the sheriff. The sheriff on the land jurisdiction is the one that is primarily tasked with keeping the peace and preserving the property rights of the people in the county and for enforcement of the organic and public law. Well, what's the organic and public law? the organic law, is generally conceived to be the foundational law of the nation. The Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution for the United States of America, the Northwest Ordinance and its attached equal footing doctrine, the Land Act of 1785. Those are all organic laws that affect everything else that's gone on here. And the public laws are generally construed to be the United States statutes at large. So you have the actual core of the nation is the setup of the nation, and the will of the nation is expressed in those organic laws and public laws. And that's what the sheriff on the land is supposed to be doing. He's supposed to be enforcing those laws. But then when you incorporate, everything flips over, and the sheriff is no longer operating in a public office. He's operating in a private corporate office, and he is being retasked to enforce instead all of the statutes, codes, and regulations of the corporate government entity. You've gone from being a peacekeeper on the land to being a code enforcer on the sea. Two completely different focuses. One is a private capacity, and one is a public capacity.
Yes.
So as a result, our sheriffs don't have a public office. They don't have a public bond. And if you look closely, they don't have a public oath. Neither do any of the members of Congress. If you look up the oath of the members of Congress, you will see that they take their oath to the Constitution of the United States.
Yes, the corporate constitution, not the constitution that was intended.
Right. So, as a result, we've got a government wildly out of control and wildly led astray. And we have governmental services corporations masquerading as the true government. And those corporations are basically owned and operated by international banking cartels that couldn't give a fig about us or our property rights or anything related to our country. They're just here for profit.
They're acting as parasites on us, in my opinion.
Yes. They're parasites everywhere they go. They have always been parasites. They've always been parasites. They've always been a source of corruption and criminality. And we need to grow up and figure out a far better way of expediting trade and delivering currency than any of the routes that have ever been proposed or tried in the past. But anyway, that's another subject. Right now we need to deal with the issues of how we got here and who are the players. We have two huge colluding banking cartels, the Federal Reserve and its banks, and the International Monetary Fund and its resources. And they have colluded together to create this fraud system. And it is a system, just, like a bookie system or a drug cartel delivery system. It's a mechanism, a machine by which they can produce money and by which they can enslave people. And it works like this. We have the Federal Reserve, and it's running a governmental services corporation calling itself the United States of America, Inc. And we have the IMF that's running another governmental services corporation calling itself the United States, Inc. All right? So you've got two gigantic banks, you've got two gigantic governmental services corporations, and they each have a roster of similarly named agencies. And how can you tell the difference? How can you tell them apart? Well, the IMF agencies are all in all capital letters, and the Federal Reserve System agencies are all upper and lower case. So when you see FBI, you're talking about the IMF version of FBI. And when you see Federal Bureau of Investigations, upper and lower case, you're talking about the Federal Reserve version. And that's what we grew up with, that situation. Now, recently, things have flip-flopped around as they've tried to begin the second round of really embedded, institutionalized criminality and fraud. They have tried to switch roles. And you'll see why that's important. In the first round, it was the Federal Reserve System, not the Federal Reserve, but a separate incorporated entity doing business as the Federal Reserve System was operating, and the storefront governmental services corporation was the United States of America Incorporated, upper and lower case. This entity was placed into bankruptcy in 1933 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was its president, corporate CEO. Well, before they went bankrupt, these swindlers created foreign situs trusts named after every living American. And these foreign situs trusts were all registered, not recorded, registered in favor of the states that were franchises of the United States of America Incorporated. So that, for example, when I was born in 1956, the state of Wisconsin, upper and lowercase state of Wisconsin, which was a franchise of the bankrupt national corporation doing business as the United States of America, Inc., latched on to my name, seized upon it by presenting undisclosed paperwork to my mother, which they foisted off on her as a simple recording of my birth event, my nativity, but which they in fact used as a means to register my name and copyright it. To register my name and copyright it. So that the state of Wisconsin obtained a copyright of my name. And they then began to act as usufruct for me without my knowledge or consent, without my mother's knowledge or consent.
Which we all know that nobody can enter into a contract for you without your full notification and permission to do so. And I don't believe that we as little waddling little babies granted our consent for any such thing. Very clever.
Now, it is. It's very clever. It's literally preying upon infants and babies. It's a most despicable crime.
Yes.
You know, to prey upon women who've just come through labor and little tiny children in their cradles, it has to be among the lowest of the low sorts of con art and crime that could ever take place. And yet this is what they've been doing on our shores for almost 100 years, and we've been oblivious to it. We haven't even taken up arms with our pens and our codicils and our body politics within our towns. If people had really realized what was going on, they would have been up in arms, and as Henry Ford commented, there would have been members of Congress swinging from lampposts long before this. I mean, just the outrageous nature of the fraud and the way it was carried out and the people that it was carried out against would be enough to moderate for the instant removal of everyone involved.
Didn't Oliver Wendell House with Woodrow Wilson, when they sat down, if it is two different people, in fact, they made it clear that every American would have their biological property recorded, and that this whole scheme, this scheme was laid out by Woodrow Wilson, was it not? Or put into play by Woodrow Wilson, in fact.
It was put into play by the prompting of Colonel Mandell House, who was a British agent, and Woodrow Wilson did sign it as the president of the British-backed United States Corporation. But anyway, what's going on here is that they're seizing upon our names, copyrighting them, and then using our names as they see fit to create personas, which are corporate fiction entities.
Yes, ma'am. And we're going to take a break. We'll be right back after a few words from our sponsors, Resurrect the Republic, Dirty Uncle Sam with Judge Anna Vonrietz. Truth Radio broadcast on RBN with Judge Anna Vonrietz. Now, I think we're all learning this fraud goes deep and is wide. There are several cases that I have been reading. There was a Supreme Court case, Milligan ex parte, which addressed this very substance. When the American common law courts are operating in an area, the Supreme Court found there is no excuse for the operation of martial law courts. And that's exactly what Bruce and I have been pointing out for a long time, that the Reconstruction essentially created by incorporating all throughout this land your state or federal courts or your county federal courts. They're all, as soon as they incorporate under the United States Corporation, they really become admiralty courts. This is a commerce law of the sea. And here's a real problem with this, because you have massive conflict of interest, first of all. I mean, that's just right off the top. Also, your association into a foreign association, namely even the American Bar Association is attached to the British Accreditation Registry, in my opinion. I think that's been proven time over. Now, we have a real problem with our political status, because the 14th Amendment citizenship that has been essentially forced into law because it was never lawfully ratified created a U.S. citizen, and basically at the time of your birth certificate, which is a bond instrument, basically a corporate name is created doing business as you. You have either by your silence or your consent to contract with the federal government, which is, by the way, one of the things that Ammon Bundy keeps bringing up. Stop contracting with the federal government, but then they went and got Bar Association attorneys, and I did a face palm when that happened, declaring themselves basically incompetent to stand for their own selves in court. But then again, it's a tribunal, so I understand also the fear. So, Judge Anna, where are we now? How can we go forward to extract ourselves and to declare ourselves the proper constitutional state citizens that we are?
You have identified the essence of the problem that they've handed us, and that is they've mischaracterized our political status. So most of the legal problems that arise are actually political status problems. They appear to be legal issues because we're being subscribed into a foreign jurisdiction, but we're being subscribed into that foreign jurisdiction because our political status has been mischaracterized and misrepresented. There are a number of things that you can do that are varying value and that work in different levels or scales of things. The most important thing that I think anyone can do right now is to get busy and organize your counties on the land.
Okay.
There are 3,100 counties in America, and of those 3,100 counties, perhaps 35 or 40 are properly constituted at this moment as viable working counties where the people have local control of the land jurisdiction and where the sheriffs are obligated by their oath and by their bond to enforce the organic law. So organizing your county on the land again and operating as unincorporated body politics is the fundamental building block that you have to have in place to secure enforcement and to begin operating your common law courts. Does that make sense?
Sure does to me. From what I understand, you've confirmed just about all of our research. Bruce Ray Riggs, who is my co-host and mentor in many ways, always looked at the 14th Amendment U.S. citizenship as a political choice because it was not ratified. Well, we have to go to break again. Our breaks are a little strange, but we'll have more time on the other side, folks. Hang on with Judge Anna Vonrietz, Resurrect the Republic, Dirty Uncle Sam, Truth Radio broadcast on RBN. Resurrect the Republic, Dirty Uncle Sam, Truth Radio broadcast on RBN with Judge Anna Vonrietz. Anna, can you explain to our audience, I have a lot of people tuned in right now that want to know more about the common law courts and how they operate and what gives them legitimacy, because, you know, there's a lot of false information going on out there being spread to divide the people as usual. So could you take a moment and explain to us what the common law courts are all about?
The common law courts are the courts that came here with the earliest colonists from England. And they are the courts that had functioned pretty much unanimously and in unity from the early 1600s throughout the Revolution and for 150, 200 years after the Revolution as the primary court system of this country. So any attempt to downplay or denigrate or badmouth the common law court system is simply purely mistaken at the very best and a fraudulent misrepresentation at worst. So the common law courts are the courts that have been the people's court since the founding. And before the founding of the United States, they were the courts of the people in the colonies. In fact, they were so taken for granted that when it came time to draft the Constitution, they're barely mentioned in the Constitution because the Constitution concerned itself with setting up a maritime arm of government. And you have to realize that the entire Constitution is fundamentally concerned with setting up maritime issues because the federal government is empowered with 19 powers. We call them enumerated powers, or services, that they are under contract to provide to the land-based United States. Okay, so it's natural that there isn't a whole lot of mention of the common law court system, the people's court system, in the Constitution because the Constitution is involved in international and maritime affairs. That's what it's dealing with. However, there's a passing mention of the People's Court System in Article 1, another passing mention in Article 6, and in Amendment 7, it's very clearly spelled out that the people and their actual assets have to be adjudicated under common law, So why aren't we seeing all these common law courts?
Exactly my question as well. I agree with you on that. So it's my position and Bruce's position as well that they have not been. It's a massive deception, and when we think about the name government in and of itself means mind control, but it's been a mind control operation that's gone on. Who said that a lie, the biggest lie told over and over and over again? Well, anyway, you get the idea, folks. This is a lie of such monumental proportions that it's really difficult for an indoctrinated culture of people, even many conservatives I know, who believe in USA. We're the greatest country in the world. First of all, they think that the United States or the District of Columbia is a country. That's their problem right off the get-go, is they're feeding into the nationalism.
Well, you're right. Before we leave the topic of the American common law court system,
yes, ma'am.
This is the people court. This is where issues between people and issues regarding our property assets are supposed to be decided according to the Constitution. And the Constitution sets up only two kinds of courts that the federal government can operate, either as a federal state or a federal county or a true federal court. They're restricted to admiralty courts, maritime admiralty courts, and administrative courts.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it that they are managing to bring in people, living people, and adjudicate issues related to living people and their property assets, foreclosures, for example? Well, the answer is, aside from their personage and barratry, which they've practiced against us with impunity by pretending that we are operating using corporate personas owned and operated by them, the other thing that they've done is they've entered into special admiralty courts, also called special executive courts. And I'm sure that you can find the exact reference, but very soon after the amnesty or armistice was signed at Appomattox, they had the court shut down in the 11 southern states. And they created 10 military districts in those 11 states, and they allowed the military district commanders to arbitrarily appoint civilian tribunals of northern sympathizers and even northerners who just came down there as carpetbaggers to sit on these quote-unquote civil military tribunals.
Yes.
And to quote-unquote deal with rebels. And that's what they've been using against us. They have been using these quasi-military tribunals in special admiralty, is what they euphemistically call it, but it's martial law, it's the common law of war, okay? And that's what they've been using. That's what the gold fringe flag is all about. Now, the good news is that if you get up on your hind legs and get busy and reestablish your counties on the land, and then establish your states on the land, and at each stage you open up your common law courts, they have to shut down. You have referenced the key decision, which is Milligan ex parte, that very, very clearly states that when our American common law courts are operating, they have to shut down their admiralty courts. They have to stop policing us. They have to go back to dealing with real maritime and real admiralty issues. And so that alone is such a relief and such a blessing that everybody listening to this message should be getting out their pens and pencils and thinking very seriously about how they can hold new elections, fill the vacated public offices, because remember, all of the public offices were vacated when the counties and states incorporated. Well, see, when they vacated all the public offices, that gave them the excuse of declaring an emergency, and then they could go in and they could institute this special admiralty court system, which they can then use to arbitrarily fleece and defraud anybody they want at will. But when your American common law courts begin operating again, that takes it right out of their hands, because under the Seventh Amendment, that's what you are owed. You are owed your own common law courts. Now, we are self-governing, so we have to get up and govern ourselves. We've been, in good faith, paying the paychecks for these animals, and they've been going ahead and doing their corporate business at our expense, and they've been abusing our credit and our good names. But that's mainly because we have not realized what was going on. We've been deluded and defrauded by their chicanery and their similar names and all of the rest of their legal antics. And so, we've been looking to them to provide the services we thought we were paying for. And instead, they've been going, oh, no, that's not what our contract says at all. So it's time for the people to stand up and start operating their own government, the only actual and lawful government there is, has got to be operated by the people of this country, for the people of this country, by the people of this country, and that includes the court system. That does not mean operating as an incorporated court. It means operating as a body politic, as unincorporated body politics. So the key to this is to operate as assemblies, as associations, as companies instead of corporations. You simply have to change the form to access the land. So instead of operating as the Joyful Bread Corporation, operate as the Joyful Bread Company. And there's no reason why you can't do that. It's just that everyone has been in this rage of incorporate everything. Okay, so you have to step back and ask yourself, why should I have protection and indemnity if I'm doing something that's contrary to the public good? Isn't that a criminal intention right from the get-go? And so why should we tolerate the existence of corporations in our midst? Well, then the argument is made, well, what if there's something that's really useful and good, but it involves risk, and people won't invest in it because it's risky? Well, I say that we got through the entire Industrial Revolution, which was pretty risky business, and nothing fell apart without corporations, so why have them now? All of those things that we think of, the railroads and the coal companies and the hydroelectric projects and stuff that were formed prior to the 1930s, the railroad barons, all of that, was all formed by companies, not corporations. The other thing that incorporating obliges you to do is pay federal income tax. So if you fancy giving 40, 50, 60, or whatever they want to demand from you as their percentage of your business, well, go ahead and incorporate. For my money, it's a much better deal to just up your liability insurance and say goodbye to the federal income taxes and all of the reporting requirements and the regulations and all the rest of it that go with it. Now, that's my opinion, and I've given it freely. Anyone who wants to be at the mercy of the federal corporation and have to be under their thumb and forefinger in exchange for the quote-unquote corporate veil, which, by the way, can be pierced pretty readily, hop to it. But the rest of us should be doing the honest thing, and we should be running our businesses as private business enterprises, as companies, even as joint stock companies. We can issue joint stock companies. We don't have to be incorporated to trade.
No,
See, there's a difference between commerce and trade, and people have to understand that. Commerce is what goes on between corporations. Trade is what goes on between people. Commerce is what goes on between corporations. Trade is what goes on between people. And that's another point. When you go to court, you appear there as a living man or woman, and you are in no way incorporated. You didn't go sign any incorporation documents, did you?
Anna, you have a couple books out that I think that people are very important. They should be reading. We have a few minutes left. Could you please share with us the links to where we can find your books and where people can go to find your material?
Sure. First, I'd like to finish off.
Yes, ma'am.
The thought that these people actually control anything through their fraud is mistaken. Just because someone is committing a fraud and a false claim against you doesn't mean that you have to stand there and take it. There are some very powerful things that you can do. One of the things that you can do is to demand to see any contract that they have obligating you to act as any form of corporate vessel or entity controlled by them. They don't have one. They don't have one. They have your mother's signature in your behalf when you were a baby, and she cannot possibly have any control over you as an adult, right? Anything
That's right.
she did ended when you were of age. So they don't have a contract obligating you to continue to be a ward of the state or a ward of the court, either one. And if you push them to it and demand to see the contract, they'll be standing there with their mouths gaping open going blah, 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 blah. The other thing is that all contracts have to be in kind. So the only way that a corporation can contract with you is through another corporation, which is why they so gratuitously set up these corporate personas for you, for your benefit, so that you can contract with them, see? But when you're standing there flat-footed as a living human being in their courtroom and you turn to them and you look at that judge and you say, you're acting in a corporate office and are a corporation, I'm a living man. I'm a living woman. We can't hear each other.
Amen.
Boom. That's it. That's the end of the story. They have to dismiss. Because the fact overcomes the fraud. Right there. Boom. You are there in that courtroom facing them as a living human being, and there's not a damn thing they can say to you. They have to dismiss.
Power of simplicity,
So, the power of simplicity. The other things that you can do that are very powerful, you can enter that same information into the court record. Do it with a handwritten note and a thumbprint. Same effect.
Judge Anna, thank you very, very much for your appearance today, or your visit today with us. God bless you, and God bless our audience. Stick with the truth, because the truth will set you free.
Take good care.